for the last year I have experimented with turmeric. Now turmeric is a compound, or rather just a spice. And if you take it and you take it over a long period of time, there seem to be a few effects that are happening. One effect that seems to be happening is that inflammation seems to be, at least according to a few sources, be decreased. Now, there is also another problem, and that's maybe the main side effect that this seems to have. And the side effect is that it seems to decrease DHT, which is some form of testosterone that probably also has a positive effect in the body. So now, in my personal view, or for me personally, the problem is that I don't really know what is better in the long term. Is decreasing the inflammational part of my body and also decreasing potentially pollen allergy to a certain extent, also decreasing the running of my nose, worth the decrease in potentially the effects of testosterone in the form of dihydrotestosterone, which then seems to, I don't know if I can really pin this down to this effect, but it seems to be the case that whenever I then do not take turmeric, that my performance is not just an anecdotal one-time thing in the gym, but it seems to be the case that over the long term, my performance without turmeric seems to be going slightly up. But then, if I do take turmeric again, so if I do not take turmeric, my nose also in winter, also if I don't have a cold, seems to be stuffed often and congested. And every time, for example, I do a bike ride, then I ride the bike, and then as I bow down basically to unlock my bike, or to lock my bike rather, my nose already is beginning to run, and I basically have to pull out a tissue. Otherwise, my nose would basically be dropping, or the things that come out of my nose would be dropping onto the floor. And this is just an example to kind of give myself, in this case, because I think of these videos as a kind of a future message to myself, or a message to my future self, seems to be the main problem if I don't take turmeric. So my baseline seems to be that I probably am reacting to many different things in the environment, even in winter. Now, this also could be a slight pollen allergy still in winter, since I, as a child at least, had more effects in terms of pollen allergy. So by taking turmeric, it seems to be the case that my nose is basically free. Not three, but free. So I seem to be able to breathe through my nose. Now, also in the last years, try to breathe through my nose more. There seems to be this thing that if you have proper tongue posture and also breathe through your nose, then it seems to affect facial musculature. It also seems to affect levels of certain hormones, such as if you breathe through your mouth too much, it seems to basically so this one thing I heard is that it might basically increase the activity of the amygdala, which seems to be responsible, at least if I remember this correctly, in some parts for anxiety-provoking thought patterns and so on and so forth. Not so on and so forth, but that's just what I remember right now. So by taking turmeric, and I've been taking turmeric just as a standard capsule. So I got these from the internet, and I bought these in the form that they were available. I also in the last years before already took turmeric in its powder form. So it comes in a spice form, and I can actually get it at the supermarket. Now the problem with this approach was that turmeric itself is, to me at least, a little bit bitter. So I didn't want to necessarily add it to food, so I had to maybe drink it, because I cannot just ingest the powder, because otherwise I would cough. So I basically poured it into a mix together with also other spices. But what I found is that the aversion of myself to drinking this spice mix was something that basically kept me from drinking this spice mix. So it didn't really work over the long term. And also spicing my food with turmeric maybe sometimes worked, but because I did not become accommodated to the taste, this became basically kind of a problem. Not that it became a problem, it just meant that I could not keep the consistency of taking turmeric in its powdered form. Now also the capsule I currently take, it seems to be much more concentrated. I think it's 450 milligrams of the extract. Now, On the other side, now I have taken turmeric. I have taken turmeric basically for 1 or 2 months, and I also have been off turmeric. Now there also could be other effects that are happening, such as maybe I sleep better in winter, for example, if I have an open window, and then I can basically cool the room. Whereas in summer I don't have that opportunity, because in summer it's also warm outside, so I cannot open the windows to cool the room. Now I did think about a cooling mattress, for example, for quite some time, and I already got some kind of cooling mattress. It is just that this was something from it is basically a very cheap version of a cooling mattress. Not a very cheap version, it still cost I think 130 euros. It is just that it is not automated, so it doesn't track my sleep and then adapt this according to my sleep pattern. It also was a little bit too noisy, such that I didn't really use it, and also now it began leaking. So what I'm trying to say here is that in winter there is the additional lever of cold which I can pull on my sleep, and so this might also affect things. And also over the long term, my cardiovascular performance goes up and down, or So Garmin, for example, has an endurance score, and this endurance score went up since I got it. So I got it since I updated or upgraded my watch to the 7S Pro, Garmin Fenix 7S Pro, and ever since I had this endurance score. Now my VO2 max has been increasing over the last year, but maybe back to turmeric and back to the question of whether to take it or not to take it. So I have been taking it now again, because I just prefer, at least on a kind of personal note, even though this might mean that I don't perform as well in the gym, I am able to tape my mouth at night, which I have been doing for multiple months, but also for multiple years in total. I am able to do this and also actually breathe through my nose at night. And also during the day, if I don't take turmeric and I just go for a walk, then I have to breathe all day long through my mouth, because my nose is just too congested. So now there might be downsides of taking turmeric. There also might be the upside that it seems to negatively impact how much DHT I think is produced. And also DHT, so basically there seem to be receptors in your hair follicles that over time increase the sensitivity, or I don't know if this is the mechanism exactly, but this seems also to be partially or to be somewhat related to male pattern hair loss, which I also try to prevent to a certain extent, but taking turmeric for this specifically is not something I did, but it seems to be maybe a side effect. And so the discussion of whether to take turmeric, in my case, or not to take turmeric, seems to be something that has very many different variables connected to it, and so it's maybe a game of, okay, do I want a nose that I can actually breathe through, which seems to be somewhat reasonable. And if I don't, for example, breathe through my nose for a certain amount of time, I also notice that my pattern of thinking seems to become a little bit different. And this is also this is also something that happens on a very short time scale. So if my nose is congested and I breathe through my nose all day, now also my body already might be in a different physical state. For example, I got pollen allergy like 2 weeks ago. It began this year, and it was actually not that apparent in the last years, but it again began, and so my nose was congested, and I also had basically somewhat cold symptoms this year, which also might be an indication that it actually was a cold partnered with the pollen allergy. But as my nose became congested and I had to breathe more through my mouth, I began to become a little, so if there is a spectrum from very, very calm to very alert, which might also drive off into a little bit anxious, then basically if I breathe through my mouth, then it seems to be the case that I'm more anxious alert, if that makes sense, which is often not that useful. So that's at least in regards to this discussion.